Alright, so what we're doing with this problem is we're going to use the three basic trig functions, sine, cosine, or tangent, to solve for the missing component of our right triangle. So the first thing we have to do is identify where our reference angle is located. So in this case, our reference angle is our x right here. We use that reference angle to identify our two sides that we're using. In this case, since my reference angle is x down here on the bottom left, the side that's across from the x over here is my opposite side. So that's my opposite side. And then the side that's across from my 22 over here, which is across from my 90-degree angle, is the hypotenuse. So those are the two sides that I'm using to determine which of the three trig functions that I'm going to use. So just as a reminder, our three trig functions are sine, which is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse, cosine, which is equal to the adjacent side over the hypotenuse, and tangent, which is equal to the opposite side over the adjacent side. So based on what I'm given in this problem, my two sides, opposite and hypotenuse, lead me to, or direct me to using which trig function has those two sides as a component. So that would be the sine. So my trig function I'm using for this problem 1 is the sine function. So we can't use a trig function without being attached to it an angle measure. So our angle in this case is our unknown, so that is our x. So the sine of our angle is equal to our ratio of our opposite side to the hypotenuse. So that's going to be 18 over 22. In this particular problem, because my x is included within my trig function. So if you remember, this whole component is just one value. This is one piece. So that means sine x has to be together. I can't have a trig function without having an angle attached to it. So what I have to do in this problem is I've got to isolate the x. I have to get x, or my variable, by itself. Well, to do that, that means I somehow have to cancel this sign right here. That's the only way I can isolate that x. I have to get it away from that trig function. So the way I do that is I'm going to take this and I'm just going to slide it over to give me a little more room to work over there. So the way I cancel out sine is I use something called the inverse sign. Being the inverse, those two are opposites of each other, which means they cancel each other out. If you remember from algebra, if I do something to one side of an equation, I have to have the exact same thing done to the other side. So if I take the inverse sine of the left side to cancel out the sine function, I have to take the inverse sine of the right side. So canceling out sine on the left isolates my variable for me. So that means that x is equal to the inverse sine of my known ratio, 18/22. This side, now that I have x isolated, this is what I'm typing into the calculator. So then I'm going to go to my calculator. And since I need the inverse sign, that means I hit second, sine -1, and then I put in my ratio, 18 divided by 22. And hit enter, and that gives me my angle. It gives me my answer, 54.9. So then x is equal to 54.9. Depending on the problem, it may ask you to round specifically. So if it's this one, I believe, says to round to the nearest degree. So that would be roughly 55 degrees.